Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed. We are in, here it is, the Phaedo. We are dialectic training in the text, and hopefully you've been watching along in the series and you've seen the significance of the dialectic in most of what's being said about why we are here, how do we live well, how do we have the virtues, what is true philosophy, what is our purpose for our incarnation, where do we go after our incarnation, and what do we do about that, because we don't want to get trapped in a repeating cycle of reincarnation, just as we don't want to get trapped in a repeating cycle of our problems in this life, or in our dreams, or in our fantasies. How do we escape the repeating cycles of problems and negative states of mind and ignorance in this life and in the next? So this altogether is Socrates' doctrine of what philosophy really is, which is fantastic and amazing. So much more interesting and betterer than the way that I was taught it at school, or the way that almost every other person that I've heard talk about philosophy talks about it as. Just kind of thinking about opinions or memorizing the opinions of European philosophers, being able to debate your own opinions. So really, the key word here is opinions. So all of those things that we talked about we are reading isn't a matter of opinion. In fact, it's unopinable. These are objects for, well, this is our learning. Trusting of the Logos. Now, the Logos isn't an opinion, but what is the Logos is one of the big questions we've been carrying with us. What the heck is the Logos? And that trusting of the Logos to understanding it for ourselves, that's where the dialectic comes in. Of course, the dialectic is needed to remember. We talked about that last time. And then finally, verifying our dianoia, a special kind of understanding directed to the Logos, verifying it in direct experience, nous. And then, of course, there are levels after that. There's the integration of that into our phronesis. And then there is the question, what is beyond even phronesis? Because if that's the state of mind equivalent to the sixth dimension, and people in the sixth are better men and gods who've completed their work here, including Socrates, and they are our fellow guides and travelers, they must be traveling somewhere. So what the heck is that seventh dimension? This is one of our questions, one of our questions that we have, one of the aspects of the super ultra mega question dynamite that we are carrying with us. What is that third level of learning after trust in the Logos, dianoia of the Logos, nous and phronesis of the Logos? What's after that? Equivalent to where are we going from the sixth dimension, having escaped our reincarnation cycles? And also there was a third part of that, super ultra mega question dynamite. What is the third search for causes? To come into philosophy, you have to pick up a second search for causes. So causes of our causes that relate to our physical world, what we call today the Aristotelian causes, using our physical senses to dictate the cause of things. For instance, what's the cause of a house? You need physical wood. You need physical builders. You need a physical blueprint. You need a physical family to desire a place to live in to even begin the process. These are the causes that we usually look to. And of course, we see this in other areas of our world. For instance, psychology, up until recently, has been interested in physical causes for things. You physically want a cookie, so that's how you will motivate yourself to do the things that you want to do. Behaviorism is called. Our legal system, physical rewards and punishments. Let's not address the cause of problems, let's just physically hurt people who break the law instead of wondering why they need to steal to eat. What could be the higher causes? On and on and on. Of course, the more we grow as a rational species, the more we can reflect on that and see how terrible and absurd and stupid that is. We know that you don't just hit kids as a form of discipline as parenting. 50 years ago, I don't know, people thought that was okay. Instead, what do? You talk with them to understand the cause of their behavior and develop a healthy relationship of reflecting on causes to understand what really motivates them. They're not motivated by physical things, so you give them a whack and then they do something differently. They have minds. They are living beings with thoughts. And like all living beings with thoughts and minds, their real causes are what they think is good. They seek things that are meaningful. They think they are attracted to things that are beautiful. We all act on what we consider to be good. Now, of course, as soon as you realize this, that should come along with a feeling of, oh yeah, that's obvious. Of course we all do what we think is good. We are not just mindless robots reacting to physical stimuli, like an AI maybe. That's obvious. I can't believe we ever did anything different than reflecting on causes to understand them. What's the cause of this? Oh, well, maybe let's address the cause. And of course, if that's obvious, then there's suddenly a small step to realizing this idea of good and evil breaks down very quickly too. Because what's evil? Some sort of non-good supernatural cause to explain behavior that we don't understand if we fail to address causes. So if we're not looking at the cause of something, why did that poor person have to steal some bread? What could be the cause? Maybe it's his poverty. What's the cause of that? Maybe wealth inequality. What's the cause of that? Maybe the capitalist system. What's the cause of that? Pathologos, an inherent allegiance to a false belief that some people are inherently better than others because they are from the same color or group, and therefore they deserve to be higher up a hierarchy and can play out their ignorance and desires on others using wealth inequality as a tool to oppress. That's an interesting belief. What's the cause of that? Oh, our human evolution, inside cave good, outside cave bad. And equally so, that was something that we had to develop to survive as a species hundreds of thousands of years ago or millions of years ago. And before we learned the logos, before we could develop language and thought, self-reflection. And of course, part of that is the allegiance to that. A blind allegiance to whoever was the tribe leader in the cave that we happened to grow up in. So therefore, part of the false belief, the cause of that false belief is it's a virtue to demand blind obedience without any self-reflection, without others seeking their self-goals, without any principles of goodness or justice. Demand blind obedience to me because I am the leader of the house, leader of the country, leader of the church, whatever. And equally so, there has to be two people in that kind of a dance. The people who accept that pathologos, that fundamental false belief that this, what we call being a dog, blind loyalty, duty, obedience to whatever the parent leader, tribe leader is also a virtue. Okay, so, and as we can see, if we look at what's the cause of that, the cause is we didn't have the logos and we needed to survive. What's the cause of that? Well, we can look into the early conditions for human evolution and the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs and the ecosphere that was created as a result from the dust of that explosion. So now we can gain an understanding of why we are where we are. Fortunately, and then we can say, oh, okay, instead of lining up all humans and give them a good spanking because, or putting them in prison or giving all human beings a nasty fine, which is kind of where we are now, because one of the tools of oppressing people is debt and slavery. And of course, stealing all of the resources. I own everything. Why? Because shut up. It's all mine, and you need to pay me to have a place to live, to have food. It's my food. Bollocks. Okay, so we can realize, well, hang on a second. We don't punish humanity. We realize it is, as it said in the text, it's not the fault of humans, it's the fault of the lack of the art of the logos. As Socrates said, everybody has a problem. Nobody is ideal. Everybody is within the ideal and the completely worthless, and part of the art of the logos is judging. So we judge that we all have problems, we are here to solve them. If this economic system of just enslaving or tyrannizing through capitalism doesn't create the conditions where we can all have the time and space and encouragement and understanding to reflect on those problems that we are here to solve, then it's absurd. We're missing the point. It's like playing Mario and just staying in the first screen and jumping up and down. You're not getting anywhere. You're not fulfilling your purpose. It's silly. However, if we see the absurdity of a problem because we've looked at causes, we can also recognize, hang on a second, that solution served a purpose. It was a solution that kind of worked at a certain period of time under certain conditions that no longer serves its purpose, no longer adequately meets that need, no longer adequately solves the problem. So we have to learn, evolve, learn new strategies to meet needs in a higher level. So there's blind, doggish obedience to whoever happens to be in charge. No, it doesn't matter how harmful they are, can be replaced with the logos, the art of the logos. Let's rationally reflect on causes, understand why things are the way they are, and learn, as we are together in this text on this podcast, let's learn the paradigm for what actually benefits. And if we realize that everybody seeks the good, then our problems aren't evil, or aren't that we weren't punished enough by the church or by our parents or by the police or whoever. Our problems aren't that we haven't suffered enough blindly. Our problems are that we do not understand the true nature of the good. And we may be carrying from those past causes a false belief about the good. No need to invent a supernatural boogeyman that causes all the bad problems that we have. This group of, hey, capitalists are not acting tyrannically because the devil is making them. If you had that idea, then how can you defeat the devil? You can't, because the devil doesn't seek the good by definition. It's a supernatural entity that by definition seeks only the bad. So that takes away art, takes away benefit, takes away rationality. You can't reason with someone who only seeks the bad. You can't benefit someone who does not seek their benefit. Of course, that's absurd. But it's a handy fairy tale to dismiss the art of the logos. You can't help that, student, says some principal in the 1900s. They are Irish, or they are, they're one of the Spaniards. They can't be, they're just a naughty child. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a sense, because instead of understanding that everybody seeks the good and understanding the causes for that idea of good that they're pursuing, they'll just hurt them, punish them, treat them terribly because they're a naughty kid or a evil Spaniard or a heathen or an infidel, or what's the Jewish word for non-believer? I can't remember. Any religion has a word for those who aren't a member of this cave, preying on that early evolutionary cause of everything inside the cave is good and right and safe. Everything outside the cave is bad and evil and scary. So, Scientologists have their idea of, Tom Cruise talked about it a lot. Oppressives, OPs, I think they're called. Anyway, it's a name to vilify the outgroup. So every war begins with giving such a dehumanizing name to the team that you want to murder with your weapons. And so they are not humans, they are the enemy. And I'm not going to talk about the names assigned to the other teams in war because they are usually freaking terrible. So very, very racist and ignorant and terrible. So what? Why are we talking about this now? Well, we can see that instead of this ignorant, false, prejudicial, pathologos-based way of understanding human problems, we can instead reflect on causes and recognize that everyone actually seeks the good. By definition, that's kind of what the word good means. The only the cause of our problems is not knowing what the good is. That's our task. That's what we seek to gain in phronesis. That's why we're in the text, but also to purify ourselves from our false beliefs about the good. That's also in the text. You have a level of purification by practicing and training yourself to seek this good, even though you might be carrying a false belief about what's good. And ultimately, they'll all come down to some sort of blind allegiance to what you grew up in, the cave you grew up in, because this is our period of evolution for humans. So whatever religion, family, culture you grew up in, they will have instilled some ideas about the good into you, which could be very racist or very, cultish. In any sense, it's not going to be the truth because that's part of what we're here for. As human beings, we get the false belief about the good from our upbringing and we forget the truth. And as we're reading, learning is a kind of remembering of what we once knew, especially of the nature of the self-good, the good itself. Not good as an adjective, a good sandwich or a good movie, but the good itself that makes those other things good, or that we recognize in things, in physical things. Oh, there's something about that thing that reminds me of the good. And someone might say, well, reminds you of what? Where did you see the good? Haven't seen it. Where did you hear about it? Haven't heard it. Where did you smell the good? Haven't smelled it. Then where did you experience this good that good sandwiches and good music and good people remind you of? Where did you encounter this good? I don't remember. That's the game. We are here to remember. And how do we remember? We start by trusting this text, trusting the logos. We cannot stop there. Then we have to go back after repeating it many times and apply the dialectic to it. That's understanding. A system of organized reflection and thought, seeing how the pieces fit together as a whole, see how it flows on, seeing there's inherent beauty and necessity to this reasoning. That's dianoia, the application of the dialectic to the logos. And what does that give us? Nous, the direct experience of the good, or the remembering of the good itself that we recognize in good things. Now, of course, we want to integrate that experience or remain in that state or have that part of the soul that sees the good itself continuously seeing that, which requires a kind of practice leading up to it. That's phronesis. The practice, of course, is the seeking this education and practice, definition and demonstration, reading, doing the dialectic and seeking it and using it at all times, desiring it at all times. That's the education and the practice, or the virtues. The virtues is the practice. So those two things come together so that when we have that direct experience of nous, we can integrate it because we've been practicing it, because we've been using it as much as we could, even when it was just understanding and not knowledge. We've been desiring it at all times. We've been making it our object of focus. That's an integration called phronesis. That's the initiation. That's what we need to get into the sixth dimension. Socrates says if we don't have that, when we go to the realm of being or the realm of Hades after we die, we will end up in the mud. And we've had lots of descriptions about the kinds of mud that's there for people who haven't done their work, haven't completed their purpose. But of course, we want to get out of the mud. So, and that description of the kinds of mud is the final boss, the huge description of the true earth. And we want to return to that final description, that final metaphor, with the training of the dialectic in our back pocket. That's why we're doing the second stage. So you could say this part of the series is the second stage of learning. We have been trusting it to read it for so long. We have been repeating it, reflecting on it, applying it to our lives, practicing it. That's the first stage, what he calls the right lovers of learning, the right philomathesis. Can't stop there though. The second stage is what we're starting now, applying the dialectic to the text and to each section of the text to make it our own. The third stage is, of course, if we do that sufficiently, all of us watching along or playing along, participating as much as they can, should experience it, nous, experience the good. So our third level of learning would be taking that experience and integrating it as best as we can by seeing what logos maintains that state of mind, that state of self. That was given in the text. People who haven't reached enlightenment, nous, or who haven't reached it through the art of the dialectic, won't know what logos, what conversations, what kinds of dialectics maintain that state of mind. So often you might know of people who've had an enlightenment experience, but then go straight back into their problems, or forget, or don't go further, or can't reconnect with that experience of true being. We won't have that problem, hopefully, because that's our third level of learning. What are they? Philomathesis, lovers of learning, that's what have been doing. Leads into what? Philosophia, love of wisdom, which is what we're doing now, which could be called philodianoia, maybe more accurately, which is applying the dialectic, gaining understanding, dianoia. And finally, philophronesis is the third one, the love of the integration into a permanent state of self necessary for our work here, and also to the kind of learning we can take with us into the next worlds, our next incarnations, and also the ticket out of the imprisonment of the cycles of reincarnation. So that's the three levels. Of course, we have super ultra mega question dynamite, which is maybe there's a fourth level, because even if we get that phronesis, then that's only a ticket to meet Socrates at the club that he's in. Hey, meet me down at the club. Me and my friends and gods and daemons are hanging out there, ready to go on an adventure. Hang on a second, where are they going? And what's the ticket to that place? So that's a question we're keeping with us in our back pocket. That's our super ultra mega question dynamite. So, we all, as we're saying today, we all act on what we think is good. We just have to go through that 3-step, maybe 4-step, at least 3-step process of learning the good. Philomethesis, philosophy, philodianoia really, and philomethesis. Philomethesis is love of learning. Philosophy is love of dianoia, really. And philophronesis. That's how we learn the good. And as far as I know, not too many schools who teach this. And of course, there are evolutionary causes why it can be difficult to realize this, and there are historical and cultural causes also in play. Why did we not learn from Socrates? Why did we burn the libraries down several times? Why did Emperor Justinian prefer to install a dictatorship based on faith instead of encouraging learning, understanding, and phronesis? And why have the pages of human history been soaked in blood from irrational, unnecessary wars, conflicts, genocide? Why do we continue to live under such irrationality of capitalism, of fascism in different places, of profiteering through war? These are things that are irrational and absurd and unnecessary. Why do we have an allegiance to it? Well, two reasons. We haven't picked up the text and gone through the stages of learning what is actually good. And secondly, we have that blind obedience to what we don't even know we believe most of the time, what we think is good. That's why we have purification and perfection. When you go to learn anything at college, you don't just learn what is true, you have to uncover and remove your false beliefs that are inconsistent. You can't be a vet while keeping the false childhood belief that cats and dogs marry each other. You got to remove that. You got to drop that. They are inconsistent. So Socrates is saying, by the way, the more that you experience the good, the more that you can separate from the physical world and realize there is a whole different dimension, maybe more, the less those false beliefs about good you got from your culture, religion, family, upbringing, time period in the physical world have an effect on you. The less they control you, the less they will dictate your life, what we call fate. Keep the repeating cycles of failure, problems, and suffering. And the more you experience the good, the less power it has. That's purification. However, there is another element to it. That might lessen the power of our problem by seeing the truth and integrating the truth, but we need to apply that same dialectic we're learning to fairly address the causes. There's our big word for today, causes of that false belief. Why were they believable? Now, we've talked about the evolutionary reasons for it, but also there is a specific reason for you. Why did you in particular believe your particular teacher that the good was something other than this, or the self was something other than this? So that's the application of what we're learning here. The second stage, philodianoia, love of philosophy or love of understanding, or love of the dialectic, practice of the dialectic, applying that to those false beliefs about the good. That's the other series we've just started on the channel. That's based on this book. They are complementary things. One helps the other. Ultimately, you can't have one without the other because, like as we know, there are people who have quite a deep connection to the true nature of the good. We call them gurus, but famously they're often depicted as also having the problems. So we have the drunken sage or the pervy sage. These are archetypes that are all through mythology and in history and anime. Goku and Naruto both have a pervy sage. So that's, of course, a mythology or a representation of the fact that there are many people who do one without the other. reach a level of enlightenment or phronesis, but haven't addressed the false beliefs about what's good, and so they still have a power, which is interesting because that would mean if the false belief about what's good can still maintain after the true experience of the good, or sometimes called enlightenment, or what we call in philosophy being, or ousia, the experience of being, then that raises an interesting question. Could our false beliefs about the good have a greater power than even enlightenment itself? Well, good question. Put that in your sack of questions that you carry with you in your inventory, and jump into this series too on the channel to overcome that problem. So what? So we can see how we can move from a culture of barbarianism, irrationality, violence, by looking at the cause of that. Oh, the cause of that is just the false beliefs that we learned through evolution before we could master the art of the logos. Before we realized it's good to reflect on causes. Before we realize that you don't make things better by introducing the opposite, the bad. So introducing violence or pain or suffering or oppression doesn't teach anyone a lesson. As we saw in the text, you can't make, if you introduce the opposite of 3, there's no opposite of 3. Oh, the opposite of oddness, evenness, 3 will be destroyed. Because you can't make something, so that was the idea that the soul is immortal. If the soul brings in life, the opposite of life is death. You can't introduce death to improve the soul, because the soul will be destroyed or diminished or run away, because by definition it needs to be with life. So you can't introduce evenness and still have 3. Likewise, you can't introduce violence, suffering, punishment and still have a goods and still have a learning, because learning is about, what are we saying today? The good, remembering the good. So if suffering and punishment and things are by definition introducing what is bad for the body, for the soul, for our experience, and the beliefs we have to make sense of it is you are bad, therefore you deserve punishment. You are irrational, so I'm not going to talk to you about the causes you have. You are a bad soul, so I'm not going to have a conversation with you. Get out of this, shut up with your questions. Then you're introducing the bad, that false beliefs that justifies violence is, by introducing violence, we are actually helping, because that's what punishment is. We're teaching them a lesson. Then we can see by thinking clearly, by following the dialectic, that is in principle wrong. It's an irrational belief. And the other way of allowing violence is, we need it because you can't reason with the devil. So it's not that these people have a false idea about what's good that they have learnt in their evolution, in their culture, in their family, and they haven't had the conditions to do philosophy to know the true good. That's not why they're acting bad. It's because the devil. Everyone is born knowing everything. Everyone is born a master of the Phaedo. Everyone is born into a perfect ideal situation, family and culture, where you never learn anything false. That's not the cause. The real cause is the devil. And you can't reason with the devil. You can just shoot him in the face and then hope, you can't even shoot the devil in the face because he's immortal. But people who are told ideas of sinister forces or the devil or evil don't usually look into it very deeply and realize that doesn't even make sense, because it is in principle used to silence reasoned reflection, to make you irrational, which is why a lot of con artists or fascists or conservatives appeal to those who are brought up in strict religious communities, because they've already been trained to forego their critical faculties. So, which is terrible, which is an injustice. These are the people who we should be creating the conditions for self-reflection and growth the most. They're the most vulnerable. Of course, That so it would seem, wow, these fascists or conservatives or right-wingers who are specifically targeting the worst kinds of upbringing, the most uneducated in the logos, or conditioned to forego reason. If they're being targeted by these fascists, these are the most evil people that there are. Yes and no. Yes, it's the most terrible, but not evil. They themselves must have a false belief about what's good, that think it's a good to abuse people in this way or take advantage of people in this way. Isn't that what capitalism is? It's good to siphon off the value of my workers to make me rich and keep them in poverty because that's good, says Elon Musk, or says the rich people who are in power. So even those people acting in the most unjust ways have themselves a false idea of the good and themselves don't have a learning in the logos. So these were the ones that need to be helped. Shouldn't be in charge of anything, of course. That would be crazy. You wouldn't have the most ignorant doctor in charge of the surgery wing of the hospital. No, of course not. You would dedicate resources for that person to have the most tutors or have the most teachers to improve so he doesn't act as a harmful doctor, but you wouldn't put him in charge. But this is, of course, just rational. We say the same thing about any discipline. The people who have the art are the people who are considered experts. So we are just pushing the implication of what's rational. So what are we seeing? We're seeing that the dialectic is the art of the logos and therefore should be a standard in understanding the cause and conditions of our false beliefs about what's good and what we need to be doing to free ourselves from our false beliefs. But don't just stay there. Use that freedom to pursue the truth about the good. And of course, when we say it like that, it sounds obvious because every other thing that we have evolved into, the art of agriculture, the art of medicine, acknowledges these principles. So it's everywhere. We are just taking the next step in evolution and saying, hang on a second, what's the paradigm of all paradigms? What's the art of all arts? Or what's the art of the good itself? Not just good agriculture, good medicine, good architecture, all of which we recognize there as these principles of removing what's false, learning what's true, practicing it, demonstrating it along with your definition, using it to benefit your subjects. We recognize these principles and everything else. The next step is, well, what about the soul? Or what about the cause of those principles? What the archetype or the hyparxis? That's what we're learning. And that's why we're going to go through the text and practice that demonstration, that practice of the dialectic to the logos, while keeping in mind we are going to encounter counterattacks from the false ideas of what's good. And when that happens, take notes of that. What are the thoughts and state of mind that come up? And put it aside to go back to our learning, or take some time out to practice the art of the dialectic on those voices. Hang on a second. Let's ask some questions about whether or not what's being said is actually legitimate, true, good, and beneficial. And of course, the further we are in our reading of this book and the other stream, the better we will be at asking those questions. But what's fascinating is, no matter whether we're seeking the true good or purifying the false beliefs about the good, the kind of only two things we can be doing as humans, whether we like it or not, we're going to be pursuing the good. And hey, the people who are trying to solve problems, whether they know it or not, they are going through some process of addressing their false beliefs about what's good. The question is, how well can we do it? How artfully and skillfully and masterfully can we do the two things we're all doing all the time anyway? And by the way, if we're not doing it artfully and skillfully, if we're not reflecting on the process itself to make it better, we will be stuck in reincarnation. We will be stuck in the repeating cycles of problems, the repeating cycles of fascism and tyranny and bloodshed in the world, the repeating cycles of problems that we have individually, if you're not reflecting on the process itself. If you think, hey, I know what's good, or even if you're someone, I know how to become good, I learned from my pastor. He has this, I grew up in this crazy religion, whatever it happens to be for you, not for you, yours is the right one, but the crazy people up the street, they grow up thinking, well, this is how I learned to be good. I study this Joseph Smith text every day. Well, if you're not reflecting on the process, then you might be just confirming your false beliefs about the good and not realizing that you're stuck. So we want to be applying the dialectic to the text, to the logos, while also reflecting on the process as we go. How are we doing? Are we seeing more clearly? Are we becoming more artful? Are we more able to benefit ourselves and others secondarily? So, reflecting on the dialectic as we practice the dialectic. What's that called? Definition and demonstration. What's definition and demonstration? The first two of the four categories in the dialectic. So we are doing a dialectic while doing a dialectic on dialectic. We are a walking dialectic, which is interesting. So you could say, hey, well, if that's all we're doing, and by the way, if the two kinds of things humans can do is learn the truth, remembering the truth through the dialectic on the logos, or remove what isn't true by doing a dialectic on the pathologos, then there's only two categories, what is and what isn't. And both of them are to do with the good or being. So what is in being or what isn't in being? And the method for doing both is the dialectic. Hang on a second. Isn't that a description of the dialectic itself? Let's put it on the board. If the only two things that we can be doing is learning or remembering the good, which is the nature of being, or removing what isn't, is not the good, or being. Then we have what is in being. Another word for being is exists, or is true, and removing what isn't. And if the process of doing this is the dialectic applied to these things of being, and this is the dialectic applied to our false beliefs, which we are seeing today is also reflecting systematically on, or structurally, in a structured way, structured, beautiful, necessary way on causes. If these are the only two things we do that we are using to understand why we have problems, why do we have problems? Is it because people are innately evil? No. We need to suffer more. So we have to introduce suffering, or what's bad, what we call behaviorism. Is it because the devil made me do it? Or evil? Both of which can be used to justify violence, which is again introducing the bad, and doesn't work. Doesn't work. We just have to look at human history and we know it doesn't work. But also we can reason. Do you make a horse better by beating a horse or by introducing the goodness of a horse? We know, do you help children by beating them? No. So it's an excuse, but we can also see the cause of this excuse. The parents who beat their children are often beaten themselves, and they think it's good. Hey, if my daddy was so big and strong when he beat me, then I want to be big and strong too. I need to find some kids to beat myself. Okay, so we look at the causes. So it's not because of that. So if these are the two things that we can do as human beings, whether we know it or not, and we can see, hang on a second, that's side A. What is about being and what isn't about being, using the dialectic, which systematically structured in a beautiful way, necessary way, a reflection on causes. This is the dialectic, because the dialectic has side A, what is, which means exists, which means being, of which the good and all of the other self terms are. That's side A. And side B is what isn't. So you can say, well, what's one way of describing humanity? A walking, talking dialectic. Humans, so therefore conclusions, therefore humans are a living dialectic. So what? Well, we've seen that if we are not doing it well, we might be living outside B. The implications or divisions that follow if we believe what isn't true about the good. It's good to hurt people, it's good to kill people, it's good to have fascism, it's good to have capitalism, it's good to exploit people. And of course the beliefs that follow. Jordan Peterson in his with his lobsters. Hey, it's good for some people to oppress other people because lobsters do it, maybe. There's a natural hierarchy in nature where the big, strong, good guys are those that can oppress everyone else, which is bollocks. But is a kind of false belief about what's good that will justify ultimately reaching what he thinks it means to be a good person and We don't punch him in the face for being like that. We instead reflect with him on the causes. Who modeled this way of thinking to him? And anybody who's followed Jordan Peterson's exploits in the last few years recognizes, well, clearly he has there are glaring causes to what he considers to be the ideal of the good. As we all do, because we are all in this game whether we like it or not. The difference is, do we want to support this or support doing the dialectic? But that's our question for us as people, as individuals, as souls. It might take many, many reincarnations for people to wake up and realize this is the meaning of life. It might take many, many repetitions of this podcast to realize, oh, maybe I should start practicing dialectic on the Phaedo. But we can see whether we like it or not, this is the game we are in. The question is, if you realize you're in the game, do you want to learn the rules and play well and have fun or not? So in the hero's journey, we could call this the call to adventure. Gandalf comes to Frodo in the Shire in Lord of the Rings and says, hey, whether you like it or not, there is this guy called Sauron who wants to enslave Middle-earth and destroy all the hobbits. This is going to happen, whether you like it or not. Do you want to join the adventure and address this problem, or do you want to suffer the consequences of it? That's what we're doing here. That's what Socrates is saying. Hey, this is how we live. Human problems, human ills, human suffering, wandering around a slave to your physical senses and desires as though you're drunk, dizzy, division and discord in humanity and within our soul. Whether you like it or not, these things are happening. Now, the question is, and by the way, not only are they happening, you are supporting it. Self-imprisonment, Socrates calls it in the Phaedo. You are actively putting your energy to supporting the thing that harms you. Kind of like we said, that's what right-wingers or fascists do. They try and get people to actively support taking money from them and giving them to the wealthy. Actively support, carry your, Donald Trump signs, even though his whole thing is, I'm exploiting you. I'm making you poorer and I'm making you worse. We are like that. So we can see in the macro examples in the world, like with, political stuff, or the same forces have to be going on within our soul. The same principles apply to our soul, as above, so below. So, whether you like it or not, we're doing this. Now, we could be doing this, putting our energy towards what isn't true. And by the way, if you're a human, that's what you're going to be doing anyway, because this is needed for a problem. In order to survive our upbringing, we have to come to a false conclusion about what is the good, which is a kind of solution that no longer applies. And that gives us a question. And also we forget what's true. This is question. The other kind of question, one is to do with remembering. One is to do with uncovering what we falsely concluded from our past. Both require applying a dialectic to it. And if you don't, you will be living out a dialectic. You will be living out the implications or the consequences or divisions that follow of this or of this. Living out having been sufficiently purified of what's false. And so we can say this side of the game is purification. This is perfection. So we can say, well, the pervy sage or the drunken master, or these gurus from, culture and stuff, is playing out having a higher experience of this, but still having this. Most people just playing out this. But it's happening automatically. We automatically play out the dialectic of whatever we're carrying as true, based on the level of perfection up the ladder and purification from what's false. Destiny and fate. So we are walking, talking, living dialectic. That's what humans are. The great thing is, if we sufficiently do our work, as what we're doing on the channel, and purify what's false, which comes as a diminishing of, there's a level of purification from the Phaedo, of separating from the body to experience the truth. So that will diminish the power of what's false. But also has to be accompanied by this on the other series we have running on the channel. If we sufficiently purify and perfect, we would be automatically playing out the implications of the good that is in being. The same way, we automatically play out our problems, the implications of what's false. So you can say, well, isn't this terribly unjust that we, whether we like it or not, play out the implications or what follows, or play out the dialectic of what isn't true about the good, keeping all of us trapped in the same cycles of problems, negative self-talk, false beliefs, projections onto the world that make it hard, self-fulfilling prophecies. And also, according to what Socrates is saying, that same repetition of our problems playing out and feeding themselves self-fulfilling and self-supporting false prophecies play out within reincarnation itself. Playing out in the everyday world, he's calling the chains. Playing out in reincarnation, he's calling the prison. Isn't that terribly unjust? Well, maybe. But if there is a game that we're in anyway, that we can learn the rules of and play to play well, the dialectic, because the dialectic is side A and side B, and then 4 categories that follow. This is the dialectic. 8 categories. That's it. If we can learn this and we can sufficiently purify ourselves and perfect ourselves, that means just as we automatically, in a seemingly unjust way, automatically, without even having to try, play out the implications of the negative dialectic, if we sufficiently purify and perfect ourselves with the true dialectic to reach the true good, then we would naturally, automatically play out the implications or the divisions or the way of being or the dialectic of what is true, would be the true dialectic. So you can say, well, isn't it terrible and false and unjust and mean that we automatically play out the implications automatically as a dialectic of our false ideas of good, causing us to be chained in our problems and imprisoned in the cycles of reincarnation? Well, what if that principle that makes us an automatic reflection of our false idea of the good is actually really, 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 really just and good and beneficial? Because when we do reach the true good, we don't have to put any effort into automatically playing out the implications of the good as an automatic dialectic. We automatically live out as a living dialectic the implications of what is. So the injustice is just a very good and helpful, by the way, couldn't that be a flow state? Automatically, without having to think or playing with the full force of your being, playing out the divisions, self, others to others, or the implications of the truth, the good that exists in being, that you are connected with through nous, that you understand through the dialectic or the logos or dianoia? Would that be a flow state? Would that be a pretty fun way of being? A state we would want to maintain that we might call phronesis? Question mark? If so, then this principle isn't unjust, it's very just and beneficial and rad. The problem is that this otherwise just or rad principle has been usurped, or as we say, as above, so below, or relations are the same, terms vary. That relationship of automatically playing out the implications of what the good is, that relationship of the dialectic stays even in the below. The difference is you don't have the above terms. So what's an unjust principle is actually really a just principle. It's just that it has been usurped. The terms from here has kicked out the real king and put on the crown and says, I am the king. So it's the terms have usurped this otherwise just principle, and that's the cause of our problems. So that's why we saw earlier, hey, vice isn't the absence of virtue. It's to have something else in the place of those principles or relationships for virtue. To really do vice well, you have to have a sustained focus. You have to think this is what's most good and real and true and clear from the text. For me to be a gambler, for me to be a banker, for me to be a tyrant. So the principles or relations are there, it's the terms that are wrong. And that's the principle of analogy. For us to be even able to have this reflection, we have to be using the relationships we discover in the physical world and use them analogically to talk about the relationships that apply to a higher world, which means a different set of terms. Different set of terms that has something like the principles or relationships of the lower level. Otherwise, how could we remember? How could we learn? We would be stuck. So you could say, well, hang on a second, isn't this principle that allows for other terms to usurp the just principles of excellence or enlightenment or flow state, to be able to have 99% of humans usurped by their false beliefs of good, to be, whether they like it or not, stuck in a loop of their problems and their reincarnations? Why does that principle exist? Isn't that unjust? That the principles can be usurped by a lesser set of terms? That the terms can change, but the relations stay the same? For above to below? Isn't that unjust? Haven't we seen today that that's the cause of all human suffering and ignorance? Yes, but if this thing doesn't exist as above, as so below, how could we ever learn? Because learning, as we're saying, is a kind of remembering of what's above. Okay. A learning of what's above by looking at things below. So things in our physical world that we sense through our physical senses in the realm of becoming, we look at those things in the realm of becoming to be reminded in some way about a different set of terms in the realm of being. So this is the two parts of the dialectic. If the reason that we are here is to master the dialectic, and the dialectic has two parts, removing what isn't and finding what is, well, we're saying, hang on a second, this being stuck in what isn't that terrible? Well, if part of the game, or half of the game, is to learn what is, which is a kind of remembering, then how do we do it? How do we remember what's true in being when all we can experience when we start off as humans is through our senses in the world of becoming. There has to be some sort of principle that says, hey, even though the terms change in the realm of being, you're not seeing dogs and cats and paintings and people, you're seeing justice and beauty and goodness and different class of humans, gods and daemons. Even though the terms change, there is some similarity between the relations that can point to analogy, what must or might exist in being. Without that, we wouldn't have things in this world, different terms, reminding us of those terms. There has to be that kind of reminding capacity for us to learn what we once knew and therefore remember. So if this as above, below principle didn't exist, we wouldn't have a way of remembering. We wouldn't have analogy. We wouldn't have a way of learning or remembering what is true about what is good. So we need this principle. So therefore we need the as above, so below principle or for side A, also called terms vary relations stay the same. Okay, we need it for this. Let's move this around a little bit. Doesn't that sound familiar? Didn't we just say the similar thing happens for being an automatic, effortless, walking dialectic of the bad? So the self, others to others is called division, or the implications that follow in all areas of things. So we are a automatic or effortless manifestation or dialectic or playing out the implications of the idea or belief of the good we carry or share in or connect to. We are connected to, or in terms of belief we carry. So this was the first thing that we said, hey, isn't this unjust? Because this keeps us trapped in suffering. This keeps us trapped in suffering. Everyone I know is automatically, and you know people, so you know them. Oh, this person, she always does that. She always says this. She's always got a negative attitude. She always thinks she's going to fail. She always gets into relationships with these sorts of men. She never sees. I'm like, oh, she opens her mouth and I start to cringe. Because it's always the same script. Now, siblings and parents, you've got more familiar with them, so you're probably more familiar with their script. Oh, I don't want to talk to him again because he always says the same thing. I can never change his pattern. It's like he's stuck on train tracks. He's always going to say the same gosh darn thing. It's annoying, and it always leads to the same problems. He calls me up and says, oh, I've got this problem with this guy. Yeah, no joke. You always have a problem with that kind of guy. You're creating it. I can't talk to you because you always force the conversation to the sorts of nonsense conclusions that lead to you having these sorts of problems, and that you are doing. It's not that guy's fault. You are being the jerk. But you won't see it, and every time I bring it up, you shut down the conversation in the same kinds of ways. You shut down the logos of the dialectic in the same sorts of ways to allow you to keep your bollocks belief about what you think is good. Everyone is that. That's everyone. Why? Because one of the features of a pathologos, or false belief about what's true or good or in being, is to silence the dialectic, because it won't be able to maintain itself. Because the dialectic is literally the one art we're here to do by applying it to our false beliefs. So we apply the dialectic to our living dialectic of our life to master the side B of the dialectic, to address what's false, but also we forget what's true about the good and reality and self and being. So we have to master side A of the dialectic. Remember, it's just two sides of the dialectic, side A and B, 4 categories. Very, very simple. Well, we have to have some reason, some attachment, some motivation. That's being a human. You are experiencing the implications directly, immediately, giving you the necessary motivation, impetus, focus, desire, natural curiosity, because they're your problems. It's your forgetting. It's your learning. You're naturally curious. You don't have to go to a guru with incense and cushions and robes and to create the false conditions to make you curious, to make you in awe, to make you wonder. You don't have to be given a mantra or a koan to make you have a question. You're naturally a walking question. These are all just derivatives of the ideal. Just like every activity we do is a derivative of the ideal. You want to get a degree? Why? So you're good enough to do what you're here to do? Which is what? Isn't everything you do? Didn't you get a degree so you could be more happy or more good? Because you thought you would be more good if you have a degree? Or you would be less bad? You would remove your ignorance? Well, hang on a second. Why don't you go straight to the goal and find out what's the good? How do you do that? Well, you ever got a degree and realize, actually, I'm not as happy as I thought I would be. How come I'm not a lasting good? All activities are that. All activities are just reflections or ways to justify for ourselves being good enough to participate in the one true activity that Socrates is outlining for us we are here for. The dialectic. That you're doing anyway. You're just not doing it well until you learn the art. Like saying, oh, well, you're eating anyway. You're just not eating well until you learn the art of nutrition. But isn't that terrible? Isn't it unjust that we automatically or effortlessly play out a walking dialectic or a manifestation or playing out the implications of our false idea of what's good that all humans are given, all humans who are born into a family, that's everyone. Everyone has a false belief. That's wrong. That's unjust. That's diminishing their self and their goals. That's blocking their ability to participate in the logos, to have good, meaningful, beneficial conversations, shuts down our growth, maybe even tells us there is no such thing as the logos, there is no such thing as being, and therefore there is no such thing as an art or dialectic. That's terrible. That's actively causing our harm and actively sabotaging our benefit. Actively, therefore, causing our suffering. And everyone that I've seen is trapped in a gosh darn loop. The record's on repeat. Almost no one gets better. And Socrates says, yeah, no joke. And you know what also happens? Therefore, they take that ignorance that they're attached to, that they played out, without purifying into their reincarnation, and most people go to the Arcusian river or lake or marshlands in the world of the afterworld that they spend some time in, and then they reincarnate back into a donkey or a bee or maybe a human, and they go back and forth trapped in a prison. Some people don't, and they go down to Tartarus and have negative experiences and then come out. Some people get stuck there forever. And there's a mysterious ocean that goes all the way around that he didn't mention. Nevertheless, yes, because we automatically, effortlessly manifest or dialectic or play out the implications, others to others, of whatever belief of the good that we are carrying, causing our chained to our problems and sufferings in our life, causing us imprisoned in our cycles of reincarnations, that sounds terrible. Why is this a principle of reality? Therefore, anyone with any sort of intelligence would conclude we live in a pretty crummy world. That's unjust to us to allow us to do that. Unless, if we do come across this kind of text or this podcast and do realize we're doing a dialectic anyway, and we do realize we can just master it and play the video game we're in well, and we do purify ourselves from what's false, and we do apply the dialectic to this text so we can find out what's true about the good, then this unjust inverted commas principle will allow us to automatically, effortlessly manifest the dialectic playing out of the implications of the true idea of the good that we are now connected to in phronesis. In other words, this is a fantastic principle to allow us to be in a state of flow, or, wouldn't you want that once you finally reach, everything we do is to become good, don't you want to maintain it? If you put on all this effort to getting a degree, don't you want it to be effortless after you finally get there? To be in a good state, maintain that good state effortlessly, and function with your degree. You are now a doctor and you can function in a way that heals people. This is what a stage of enlightenment. Sometimes we call it being in flow. And of course there are levels, so therefore, what seems like an unjust principle that's mean for almost everyone actually is a necessary principle that's actually good and beautiful when applied to the higher terms, the above terms, not usurped by the terms below. So what's the only difference? The only difference is whether you're playing out the implications of the lower terms, your problem, what isn't true, your pathologos, your false belief about goodness, truth, being, all of the aspects of being, particularly the good. So it's usurped by a pretender to the throne. Sitting on this throne, this fantastic principle, should be the true king, the true idea of the good that you are connected to or sharing in. Have nous and knowledge and understanding, nous and dianoia of, or phronesis. So it's not an unjust principle, it's a necessary just principle. The only problem is, like all problems, it's applied to the relations of the below. Imagine being purified from your problems, not having that same conversation with mum or dad or your siblings over and over again, but actually being connected to the truth of reality is that no matter what conversation you're in with anybody, you would effortlessly and automatically be manifesting the dialectic of that. Wouldn't that be wonderful? All right, fine, fair enough, okay. So the cause of us being enchained to our problems or imprisoned in reincarnation is actually not terrible and sign that the devil rules us. Damn you, devil, with your evilness. It's actually really, really good and important and needed and beautiful when you think about it. It's just that principle or relationship is needed, which is actually the dialectic, by the way. playing out the implications of what follows. That's the third category of the dialectic. Only we don't have it under what is, others to others of what is, it's the others to other of what isn't. Okay, fine. It's just that there's this principle in reality, as above, so below, allowing it to be usurped by the below terms. So what's the above and below the terms? The relations stay the same. So the relations are in both. The terms vary. All right, fine. Okay. You've convinced me, Socrates. I'm being Simius talking to Socrates. This isn't me saying this, is Socrates giving us the puzzles to figure it out for ourselves. But if that's the case, then the principle is great, the relation is great, but the terms vary. This principle that terms vary but relations stay the same, that allows this otherwise beautiful principle to be usurped by our problems, keeping us in suffering in this life and in through multiple reincarnations. This principle that allows it to be screwed with, that's the unjust principle. This is wrong. This is evidence. Any thinking person would realize this principle is evidence that we live in a crummy world that doesn't care about us, or is not just doesn't care about us, is specifically mean to us. As above, so below. Baloney. I don't want enlightenment applied to the below. Well, we saw two things, haven't we? We've seen that we are a walking dialectic, giving us the conditions to meditate on it and master the art of what's false and what's true. Side B, what isn't true. So the dialectic, what if beauty exists? What if beauty doesn't exist? And then we did that before. If it doesn't exist, it's all an illusion, or it's all opinion, or its beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That kind of thing. Well, okay, so the thing that allowed this to be okay is that well, it's a problem when it's applied here, but we need to apply it here. Well, what about this side here? If this is a purification of what's false, the false terms on the throne, usurping the throne, causing our problems, then, okay, let's say we purify ourselves from that. Being free of problems doesn't make you wise, or doesn't make you smart, doesn't make you know the truth. Being free of cancer doesn't make you the ideal. Just like we said, hey, having the experience of the truth doesn't remove your problems. That's why we have all those archetypes of pervy sages or drunken sages or whatever. Equally so, being purified doesn't mean you're perfected. Our perfection involves a kind of remembering or learning, which is remembering what we once knew. How are we reminded of what's above when we only experience the below? How do we reconnect and remember and bring to our state of being or vibration or consciousness or state of mind, imagination? How do we bring that back into mind when we're in the lower, when we're below? How do we bring back to mind what is in being when we are only, by nature of starting off as a human, or being a human, we are only aware of the physical world? Why get into spirituality? Why get into metaphysics? Why even get into philosophy if it's to do with the realm of being? Why, as Socrates suggested, do we seek the second level of cause? Not the Aristotelian causes, the physical causes, the true causes. Like we said, one of those true causes, everything we do is we're caused by what we think is good. In fact, our false idea of the good is the cause of all problems, individuals and society, not the devil, not because they haven't been punished enough by sadists. No, it's simply their idea of the good isn't the right one. Meaning they haven't spent the time and practice applying the dialectic to what isn't, or purification, and applying the dialectic to what is, or perfection. Both are the two parts of the dialectic, so we can say they haven't been doing their job of mastering the other dialectic. But if we all start there, forgetting the truth, and therefore can be tricked by what's false, even after we've removed what's false, how do we remember the truth? When we're in the lower, the below, the becoming. Socrates called it the second search for causes. So hang on a second. I know that I'm not my physical causes. There is a mind. What the heck is the mind? Because I know that my bones are only here because I think it's good, and that's my mind. Which means there's an idea of the good, and that's not in physical world. That's in being somewhere. So that led him into philosophy. By the way, he said there's a third search for causes. I'm not going to tell you. That's one of our questions. That's part of Super Ultimate Question Dynamite. Nevertheless, there's something that has to awaken this philosophical quest. And if you don't realize there's another dimension, there is something that actually eternally exists. Or you haven't had a near-death experience and realize that there is something eternal or being of your soul. Or you haven't had a meditative or dance or through drugs or through breath work or through childbirth sometimes, through sometimes fasting. You haven't had an experience of the non-physical, then how do you even know that there's something worth pursuing? Or how do you get reminded of the realm of being, the terms in being of the above, when we start in the realm of becoming, the below, and those terms? There has to be some principle that says the relations can change, the relations stay the same. There is something similar about our world, even though we can change the terms. This is needed for analogy. So before we said, hey, isn't this effortless playing out of the dialectic unjust because it causes our imprisonment and enchainment? No, because it is needed for here. It's just that it's been usurped by the lesser set of terms. Well, isn't this being able to be usurped by a lesser set of terms unjust? Because therefore that would be the cause of our problems? Well, no, because this principle is needed for remembering. As above, so below. If this wasn't a principle, we wouldn't have the principle needed to remember and go through our perfection and master side A of the dialectic. So this isn't unjust either. It just can be used in an unjust way by our false beliefs. So again, it's not that this principle of as above, so below is bad. It's just that the principle has been used by the below to cause our problems. But even that, when you reflect on it, gives you what you need to realize, oh my God, there is something above. Because there must be something causing my problems, which must be a higher principle that not only causes my problems, but all problems. Meaning there must be a higher principle in the realm of being that is causal of this physical world. And if it turns out to be just and beautiful, then this principle might be able to be utilized to perfect my learning and actually get there and understand it. So what have we done today? We've started by saying, hey, a lot of people are in our world, in our society, in the course of human history, and within our own souls, are mean to ourselves, mean to each other, and just stuck in these repeating cycles of irrationality and violence and meanness and oppression and capitalism and fascism and all this kind of crap that's not needed and objectively ruining everything and making everyone's life miserable. Why? that seems like there must be principles that are unjust in our reality. Maybe it is the devil. Maybe we are in a evil matrix simulation. Well, okay, what are they lacking? Why are they not learning from their mistakes? Why are we not getting better? Why are we not learning or purifying? And why are we not getting better or perfecting? Well, they're not doing the dialectic, the thing that Socrates says what we're here for. What's that? A reflection, a systematic, structured, beautiful reflection on the cause of problems. And then we said, hang on a second, that's just like being a bad parent. Any bad parent is bad because they're not in a conversation reflecting in a beautiful, systematic, structured way on the causes of the problems faced. Kid doesn't do something I like, whack. Or you're a bad kid, or no dinner for you, or no Pokemon for you. That's not finding the cause of why it happened, or the cause of why you are being a dick to your kid, being a tyrant yourself. What caused you to be tyrannical? No one's reflecting on causes. This is the cause of an unhappy household. And equally so, as above, so below, the society. Ain't no one reflecting on the causes of why they do it. And they're just trying to get bigger weapons or more financial power over others, not power with others, so they can enact more effortlessly the negative dialectic, push their problems, project their problems onto others, and inflict the suffering, the sadistic infliction of suffering onto others, so they are not the ones allowing them to play the tyrant role and not the abuser and not the abusee, giving them a temporary respite from their own internal abuser by being daddy on others, inflicting the tyranny on others. We can see this comically with Donald Trump and the way he treats the world and treats his children, the way his parents treat him, or I'm picking on the Republicans because they are so comically easy to see because they are so terribly fascist. But we talk about them, they always tell on themselves. They always say, oh, the left are trying to, let's take Elon Musk. The left are trying to silence people's voice on Twitter, so I'm going to take it. And the first thing he does is silence non-Nazi voices on Twitter. Republicans, oh, the left are against the working class. The first thing they do in power is remove rights for unions or for workers. All right, so they're projecting onto others their problems. So this is so they are being automatically playing out the implications of their own problems and not mastering the art. So that's the above, that's the society, just like in the household. And just like anyone who's a human being would have internalized one version of that. There's a reason why Trump appeals to 40% of Americans. It's just like daddy. And becomes our internal critic, our internal self-voice that shuts us down. So we started by looking at problems in history and culture. We realized, oh, this is the cause. They're just doing this. They're just projecting or playing out the implications of their false idea of the good, which is usually from a mum or dad acting in a tyrannical way, or some parental surrogate, supported by, of course, the religious and cultural mythology, also supported by the period in time, also supported by the evolution of humanity, going all the way back to the cave. Nevertheless, that's what they're in. That's where all those are the causes of the false belief of what's good. They don't ask those questions. They don't draw that diagram we just drew. Instead, they automatically play it out. And so, what would be the opposite? What would be the actual good that would solve those problems, purify from side B? And not only that, being purified from our ignorance doesn't make us wise. We also have to perfect our learning of what is true. And we talked about how some gurus have what's true without purifying their problems, and they play out their problems with more spiritual force. Likewise, there are some people who go through philosophical midwifery and purify some of their problems, but then don't spend that freedom to master the art of the dialectic. They don't realize, oh my goodness, if this helped me so much, maybe it's worth understanding why, or helping myself in deeper ways, or helping others. If the art of the dialectic helped me free my problems, maybe I should learn this art of the dialectic. If I'm now free of what's false, maybe I can use that freedom and extra power and effort and motivation and concentration to seek the truth. So you can't have one without the other. So we recognize all problems are essentially the walking dialectic of this and the absence of the conditions to purify this and perfect this. This isn't taught in schools. We killed Socrates. All the past translations of the Phaedo have been garbage. And philosophy isn't taught this way at school. For, of course, family reasons, societal reasons, cultural reasons, religious and political reasons, and evolutionary reasons. Nevertheless, this is the way it is. So what are we doing? Are we mean? Are we going to troll other philosophers' YouTube channels? No, we are looking at the causes. We are doing the opposite. We are systematically and in a structured way, beautifully reflecting on the causes for why things are the way they are. What's that systematic, structured, beautiful, and necessary reflection called? The dialectic. We are practicing the dialectic on addressing problems. Therefore, we would have to create the causes or the conditions for this philosophical midwifery, the use of the dialectic on side B, which we're all doing anyway, but let's just do it in a better way. Not just throwing spaghetti in the wall without reflecting on what we're doing, not learning from our mistakes. Let's stop that and do this. But equally so, we'd have to create the conditions for perfection. We'd also have to not just do midwifery, the dialectic on what's false, but read the Phaedo properly. And structure society so it's not, hey, who can oppress and destroy everyone quickest? And let's give them all the money. Let's rationally, systematically, in a structured way, in a beautiful, harmonious way, use the technology and resources to meet all human needs in an efficient, sustainable, beautiful way so that we are free to do what we're here for. This and this. So what are we doing? Actually solving problems. Equally so for our soul. How can we, in an efficient, structured, systematic, efficient, renewable, sustainable way, meet all of our other physical needs so that we can create the space and time to do what we're here for? Otherwise, we are going to be playing out our tyranny, keeping us trapped in our problems, imprisoned in our reincarnation, effortlessly playing out the implications of our false beliefs. In other words, that's called vice or injustice. And freeing ourselves from that and from the necessary desires and needs of the body so that we can spend that freedom to perfect ourselves in the art of the logos, which we're doing anyway because humans are a living dialectic. So in other words, play the game we're playing, but just play it better in a way that can solve problems. So today we started by looking at what's the cause of human problems, saw it, see why they're not learning from their mistakes, realize that our very reflection on the cause of human problems is missing, which is why we're not learning from our mistakes, learning that there's a name for that reflection on causes in a way that can solve problems. It's called the dialectic. Realize that this is the very thing Socrates is telling us will solve problems and we're here to do. Then we realize, okay, great, we can understand why problems are, why they're not learning, what will be needed to learn. Oh, we're doing it. But not just for problems, we also have to apply it to perfection. So this is what philosophy is. Philosophy is applying the dialectic to the realms of being, to the realm of being and the aspects of being to know the true good. So true solving problems isn't just removing what's sick, but creating the conditions to get the excellence. But 99% of people are in this. And apparently, according to what we read, is trapped in the reincarnations of the Arcusian marshlands, back and forth between reincarnations. So we understand what causes human problems, what we should be doing instead. But the fact that we are suffering our problems, isn't that a mark of injustice? Because of these two principles? We are a walking dialectic, meaning we're effortlessly playing out our problems. We're effortlessly playing out the implications, which is part 3 of the dialectic. And then we realize both this principle and this principle, as above, so below, are actually not mean and unjust. They're actually wonderful things when we are here. It's just that they can be usurped by this nasty guy to maintain our problems, to play out our problems. But you can say, well, even that is not unjust, because if there wasn't something maintaining and causing and maintaining and playing out our problems, then we wouldn't have what we need to have a question about what isn't. Therefore, we would have no motivation to go through any of the effort or courage or maintain that you'll learn the virtues of courage and discipline and temperance and wisdom and justice, to go through all of the work needed to purify or master side B as a living human of the dialectic. So even these which cause our problems are actually serving a higher justice and beauty, because it's giving us the necessity to master the art of the dialectic in terms of side B. And dialectic has side A and B. So you can say, well, yeah, our problems are these amazing principles that are the causes for states of enlightenment, for causes for learning into enlightenment and to maintain that effortless flow state of enlightenment. Yes, these are what cause our problems, only we're not applying it to enlightenment, we're applying it to our false belief about what enlightenment is, based on the appearance of enlightenment of certain parental figures when we were very young. But so that's the cause of our problems, but even that will therefore maintain our problems, which stinks while we're in it, especially if there isn't anybody telling us about the dialectic, telling us about that we can read the Phaedo in a new way, telling us about how we haven't understood philosophy at all in our society, telling us that we can understand human problems, even though most psychotherapists don't say that. And only a few, based on the tradition of this, are saying yes, all problems are understandable. Given that no one knows about them, or we're told the opposite, doesn't it stink that 99% of us are going to be using these principles to maintain our problems and our suffering? Yes, that's what stinks. That's what is the cause of suffering. But if it wasn't there, an even worse problem would happen. We wouldn't have something to maintain a false idea of the good. We wouldn't have these implicate the suffering or the implications that follow to motivate us to develop a question about what's false, and therefore we wouldn't have the causes or conditions needed to, in our lifetime, practice and master the art of the dialectic applied to side B, the purification of what is not the good or being or self. So yes, these conditions, which are actually the causes for the great states of enlightenment and learning, are usurped for being and become the cause of our problems, but even that serves a higher purpose. But you won't remove your suffering unless you unpack that question with the dialectic. In other words, unless you do that purpose. And that's what Socrates is saying. That's the cause of problems. Human problems within our soul, cultural problems, war, civil discord, the creation of non-philosophers, people who actually love debating or love their own opinions, or reject the logos, art, reality, or the dialectic. Yes, all of those problems, and also therefore keep you chained to your problems, keep you imprisoned in the cycles of reincarnation, and propel humanity towards its, as we can see now, its inevitable destruction of its race and its planet, because there are many species who have gone extinct. Humans could be one of them. There's no reason that says it can't. All follow if we don't listen to him and learn the art of the dialectic. Not just listen to him, but trust the logos. That's not him. It's easy to disagree with Socrates. I'm not saying this. The logos is saying this. Trust the logos. Don't just trust the logos, understand the logos. Do the dialectic. And then verify for yourself all of the things that you would demand of any sort of teacher. Start by trusting for good reasons. Don't just end up with trusting. Understand it for yourself. Make it your own. Verify your understanding in direct experience, while at the same time reflecting on that whole process of learning you've been going through to make sure you are actually developing and you're not stuck in a chain of repeating your problems. All of this Socrates is saying in the highest level. Therefore, we can conclude this is the best kind of learning possible. In principle, understanding the cause of problems, why we have problems, how to remove them, understanding what is needed in our perfection, reflecting on the process itself to say these are the conditions for a good teacher, always, and applied to the highest terms would make you the archetype or the hyparxis or the ideal or the paradigm of all teachers. So this is therefore the greatest kind of teaching from the greatest kind of teacher. Encouraging, motivating, propelling us up to be that level of being ourselves. A kind of ideal, spiritual teacher, so we can call him a guru, the best kind of guru, making all of us gurus if we do it. If we don't, we are becoming an anti-guru. We're becoming an expert of our problem. Keeping us chained, acting unjustly, stuck in vice, imprisoned in reincarnation. So you're a guru whether you like it or not. Do you want to be a true guru, or do you want to suffer and cause suffering? Simple question. Also, this is fun. It ain't those kind of gurus where you have to sit on a mat and cringe your teeth and starve yourself, or repeat a boring catchphrase for a million times until that mantra suddenly triggers something. No. Those are all derivatives or divisions, shadows of this, which is the true game. You're naturally curious in removing your problems. You naturally want to learn. You naturally want to enjoy the happiness, the bliss, the beauty, the wonder of the experience of being or enlightenment. You naturally want to enjoy, appreciate, wonder about the clarity and the freedom of removing your problems. So that bliss, complete knowledge, wonder, and this clarity and freedom, you naturally want. It's not an effort. Not effort. That's the game we're in. Well, we can therefore conclude it is the drum roll, please. Where's my drum roll? Okay, I lost my sound effects. I need a drum roll. It's the ideal guru, or the ideal learning. Ideal teaching. Or archetypal or ideal guru. Because guru just means teaching applied to the highest, including spiritual or states of being or enlightenment. And it's fun, and it's this fun, and it's the fun, interesting, inherently and therefore it's the best game in town. Best game in town. No matter what town you're in. Oops, we can't see it at the bottom of the screen. Best game in town. It's the ideal training, it's the ideal guru. Socrates says it's the meaning of life, what we're here for. And we have hopefully gone through a kind of reflection using the structure of the dialectic as our guide to understand why it must be so. So what are we doing? We are practicing the dialectic, which is what he is saying we need to do. Don't just trust this, practice it. Make it your own. Reflect on all of the conclusion. Why is this the meaning of life? Why does this solve problems? Why are there problems within society for 2,500 years if we don't do it? Which we're experiencing today. Why do we play out our human problem, suffering, discord, and ills? Why we wander around drunk, stuck to our suffering? All of these things are from the text. These are conclusions given to us in the text that we trusted. Yeah, of course, he's probably right. He's Socrates. No, not because, of course he's probably right. He's Socrates channeling the logos from self. Don't stop there. Take all of these conclusions, all of these hypotheses, apply it, reflect on it with as high a degree of integrity you can, using your own experiences and the dialectic to understand why. So if somebody comes to you and says, what's the meaning of life? And you say, oh, it's to master the other dialectic. You can say why it has to be the case, why it's necessary for it to be the case, why it's beautiful to be the case. And you can use you can reflect in a systematic and structured way on the cause of the dialectic to be the meaning of life. It's yours. Why it's what solves problems. Why it's the reason we aren't solving problems. Why this is therefore not only the ideal teaching, Socrates is the ideal guru, which is his quote, many are the staff bearers, but I am the true mystic, or philosophy is. Not I am, he didn't say I am. The correct use of philosophy, the correct practice of philosophy is the true spiritual tradition. But it's also why it's a fun, interesting, inherently, why we naturally are curious, and it's not suffering on a mat or being hit with a bamboo stick by a Chinese guru until you focus on your mantra or your koan. Nonsense. It's inherently good. You don't have to punish. By the way, he might have a problem if he wants to hit people. It's naturally interesting and it's fun. My goodness, isn't this fun? No sound effects. So therefore, we can come to the conclusion and understand why it's the best game in town. And it's really the only game in town. Whether you find yourself in a different time period, on a different planet, maybe you can learn how to astral travel or something, and you can whisk away to another alien species on another galaxy, 100 million light years away. You'll probably want to be playing the same game. Hey, how's the art of the dialectic going? Who's in the Phaedo? Who's in this book? How well are you going in practicing being a living dialectic, learning the living dialectic, becoming an ideal guru on what isn't true and what is? Which might be interesting because Socrates is saying, hey, if you can do this, when you leave your body, you can go to the sixth dimension with better men, gods, and maybe daemons too, who've completed their work here, but are also fellow guides and travelers. In other words, they are playing a game there. And the ticket in seems to be the dialectic, seems to be this. The mastery of it, or the phronesis of the dialectic. So whether you're not only best game in town, not only best game in the galaxy, not only best game in all galaxies, maybe also the best game in multiple dimensions or reincarnation, because these guys are doing something and the ticket to the club seems to be this, so they're probably going to be using this to get somewhere even better. That's the super ultra mega question dynamite from the last section of the text. And we are doing it. We're training in the art of the dialectic by taking all of these conclusions, making it our own, reflecting in this kind of a way, which will further motivate us. And also, as we go through the text, applying this kind of reflection of the dialectic all the way through. Hopefully, when we get to the big boss, the true world, the true earth, with its various rivers and marshlands and souls and things, will be trained up enough to apply this kind of reflection to the ideal, because that might be being itself. That Socrates' explanation of the true earth might be the highest term above that we apply this living dialectic that we master, becoming an ideal student, an ideal guru ourselves, applying that ideal teaching to the highest term, the explanation or the description of the true earth. That would be the final boss of the text. That would be the highest. That's what we're training for. This is why we're training for it. It's the second level. The first level was repeating the text. That's the true love of learning, trusting the logos. The second is this, reflecting on the conclusions, on the parts with the dialectic to make it our own, seeing the beauty, seeing the fun, seeing why it's necessary and beautiful in this structured way. That's what we're doing. We're in part 2 and we're starting the text again, going through part 2, leading up to the final boss, the true earth, which might be the highest term. And that maybe, just using the reasoning of the text, might be the ultimate trigger into the state of nous and remembering the realm of being, because we are doing what? We're reflecting on the realm of being. That's the true earth he's describing. So we're specifically looking at it, but we're looking at it in a specific way with the dialectic that we're here to learn. So if we are to remember the truth, then we were at the realm of being at some stage. The difference is we are going back with the art of the dialectic in our back pocket. And we know the last stage of the dialectic is to go back to the start, but you see it in a new way because you've gone through that reasoning process. You've seen not just what a bike is, but how it functions, how you can impress your friends with the bike, how you need to take care of the bike. All these other things allow you to see the bike in a new way. That's our example, but that's the principle of the dialectic. You go back to the start with a new set of seeing because you've gone through the dialectic, you've understood it in a new way. So too, if we are returning to what we once knew in a kind of remembering, but our way there has been through the dialectic, we're doing a dialectic on reality. So we're going to be ideally remembering the truth of what's good and what is the good in being, with applying our dialectic to reflect on it. By the way, that seems to be this final boss, the description of the true earth in being, the fifth dimension. That made no sense to us, but if we go through the text on our second pass, our first pass was a trust and a remembering. Our second part is this, applying the dialectic to it, which is a kind of training or preparation or virtue or practice or education, what we call the true or ideal teaching from the ideal guru. Therefore, when we get to the end of the text, the final boss of the text is actually the final boss of our dialectic, being itself. So we are looking at the ideal term with the ideal training and understanding, and that should hopefully trigger for us the experience of nous, taking us into our third pass of the text, which is applying our direct experience out of the soul of being with the art of the dialectic to see if we can integrate it into our state of being, as Socrates says in the text, to see what kinds of logos support our state of self, support that state of enlightenment, what kind of arguments in the text don't, why is the case, So now we're going to be reflecting on the integration of that final boss through the dialectic into our state of self while reading the text a third time, because as he says, this is needed to see what arguments or what logos support that state of enlightenment or that state of self-being, phronesis. So those were the three. By the way, we've got super ultra mega question 4, which is there a state beyond that? So we're keeping open in the back of our minds, in our inventory of questions, could there be even a fourth pass of the reading of the Phaedo that's beyond even phronesis? Let's see if we get to there. Good for us. Let's see what happens when we get there. But that's where we are now. We had a practice of it with many of the conclusions today. We are seeing why we're going through it a second time, how we're going back to a second time, what our goal will be, why our goal will transition into a third reading perhaps, and then maybe we'll do it again in a new way for a fourth reading, because this is the best game in town. I hope you find it fun. I hope you find this naturally curious. I hope there's something that resonates with you about this best game in town, and hope you are not only resonating with it, but maybe even developing your own understanding of why it's necessarily the best game in town, why it's beautifully fun and interesting, and why this reflection, systematic structured reflection is itself so beautiful and meaningful, and is the ideal teaching from the ideal guru. They call it the noblest game, but we can call it the funnest game in town. So next time, we'll take in that, back to the text for our second pass. Let's see if we can do it. Lots of fun, lots of coolness, lots of radness. Yes, the principles that are there can cause problems as we go, but we know now that they are just going to be the greatest principles, especially if we're reading this text, and especially if we get to our third reading. The principles that cause problems are just actually there to help us if we can see it from a higher way. And that vision of the greater justice and necessity and beauty of the whole, that's caring for us, that's guiding us, that wants us to do well, that yes, can cause problems if we don't do this, but is actually going to keep us in that state if we do, help us effortlessly be in that state if we do, help us function beneficially if we do. All we got to do is match it. Match it. Rise to the task. Have courage, have trust to do it. Play the game. And it's easy because it's the most fun and it's the bestest game in town. On that note, I hope to see you next time, where we will play this game more, have lots of fun in the most meaningful way. Thank you for joining me. As always, like and subscribe on YouTube. You can follow along on Twitch, join the channel, and you get notifications, or you can join live and ask questions live. You can join on Discord, and I notify everyone before we stream, so you can get notifications when we go live on Twitch. So yeah, join the Discord. This text is below that you can get for free. And if you want to support on Patreon, please do, if you're able to. It's not necessary, or it's no pressure or anything, but if you do, that's fantastic. If you think this channel is worth supporting and maintaining and improving and growing and nurturing, you can do it that way. And I hope to see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me, and lots of fun.